Alone. He builds sail west to find new lands. He spent years gathering resources and recruiting crew members for his fleet. When he was finally ready, he set sail and disappeared into the vast ocean. Thorvald's fleet landed in Helluland, a place so white that the men could hardly believe their eyes. It was covered in ice and snow, and they didn't see much wildlife. They stayed for a few days, but the cold and the barren landscape soon drove them to move on. Next, they came to Markland, a forested land with plenty of game. Here they stayed longer, hunting and gathering resources before setting off again. Finally, they arrived in Vinland, a land of rolling hills and lush vegetation. The climate was mild and pleasant, and the soil was fertile. There were vineyards and apple orchards and wheat fields as far as the eye could see. The Vikings settled in Vinland and began building a settlement. They planted crops, raised livestock, and explored the surrounding areas. While the men were out exploring, they encountered the natives of the land, a peaceful people who lived in small villages. The Vikings traded with the natives, learning about the customs and culture of the people. But as time went on, the Vikings became more and more aggressive. They began to demand that the natives give them more and more resources, and when the natives refused, the Vikings attacked. The Vikings had never fought a battle in Vinland, but that was about to change. One day, while the Vikings were out exploring, they were attacked by a group of warriors from a nearby village. The Vikings were outnumbered, but they were better fighters, and they won the battle. However, the attack left several Vikings dead and wounded, and the rest of the men were shaken. They had never fought such fierce warriors before. From that day on, the Vikings were more cautious when they ventured out into the forest. They traveled in larger groups, and they always carried their weapons with them. They also built a fort to protect themselves from future attacks. As the years passed, the number of Viking raids and battles with the native population increased. The Vikings were becoming more and more aggressive, and the natives were becoming more and more desperate. Finally, the tension between the two groups reached a boiling point. In 1000 AD, the Vikings launched a massive attack on a native village. They killed or captured everyone in the village and burned the town to the ground. The natives fled into the forest, but the Vikings were hot on their trail. They chased the natives for weeks, killing anyone who tried to escape. In the end, the Vikings had won, but they had also made a terrible mistake. They had completely destroyed the native population of Vinland. And as the years passed, they began to regret it. Thorvald's dream of a prosperous settlement in Vinland was dying before his eyes. The lush fields were becoming overgrown, and the abandoned villages were falling into disrepair. Thorvald knew that something had to be done, but he wasn't sure what. He spent long hours pacing the floor of his longhouse, trying to come up with a solution to the problem. Finally, he decided that the best course of action would be to seek help from the outside. He would send a letter to King Olaf Tryggvason of Norway asking for troops to put down the rebellion. Thorvald's plan was risky, but it was his only hope. If he could restore order to Vinland, he might be able to make his settlement prosperous once again. But if the king refused to help him, then all was lost. Thorvald gathered his advisors and told them of his plan. To his surprise, they agreed that it was a good idea. Thorvald wrote a letter to the king and sent it off with a messenger. Then he waited. Weeks turned into months, and still there was no reply from the king. Thorvald began to despair, but then a ship arrived carrying a small band of soldiers. At first, Thorvald thought that it was too late, that the king had sent the troops to punish him, not to help him. But then he saw the look on the soldiers' faces, and he realized that they were here to help him. With the help of the Norwegian soldiers, Thorvald was able to put down the rebellion and restore order to Vinland. The Vikings and the natives eventually made peace, and together, they began to rebuild the settlement. Thorvald's dream of a prosperous settlement in Vinland was finally becoming a reality. But his time in Vinland was coming to an end. After 5 years, it was time for him to return home. He had accomplished everything he had set out to do, and he was ready to move on to new adventures. As Thorvald's fleet sailed away from Vinland, he looked back at the settlement and knew that he would never forget what he had seen. He had discovered a new world and helped to establish a new society. And he knew that his legacy would live on long after he was gone. And so the tale of Thorvald, a forgotten Viking who reached America before Columbus, is passed down through the ages. It's a story of adventure, exploration, and bravery. And it reminds us that the Vikings were more than just fierce warriors. They were also explorers, traders, and settlers. They were also humans just like us, with hopes and dreams for the future. So the next time you hear the word Viking, don't just think of horned helmets and ferocious warriors. Think of Thorvald and his crew, the brave explorers who dared to sail to the edge of the world and discover a new land. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode of our channel. Until next time, goodbye.